So it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce my friend and also noted local historian and author, Sarah Hermans. She asked me to keep this brief, so I won't mention her accomplishments, but I will say that Sarah was born into several very old Dutchess County lines, so she never really had a chance. She was going to be a local historian from day one, and that is part of what makes her book so delightful. And of course, that volume, which I just coincidentally happen to have a copy of here, is available for purchase at the Oblong Bookshop and a few other locations here in Dutchess and online. And we hope that you will enjoy tonight's event and get a copy for yourself. And in the meantime, Sarah, please take it away.
Okay. Yes, I wrote a book called the 1903 Jackson Corners Signature Quilt. You can see some of it behind me in the Zoom chat, and you'll see some more close-ups as we get going. But tonight I'm going to focus on the Ladies' Aid Society, the Jackson Corners Methodist Church, who were responsible for the quilt, and some of the other gals who are on it, and to tell you about all of those things. So this is how local women raised funds for their church via signature quilt in 1903. And so we're going to talk about signature quilts today. We're going to talk about that Jackson Corners Methodist Episcopal Church and its Ladies' Aid Society and the biographical highlights of those gals. So how did I get this thing? In 2010, my cousin Judy gave it to me through my dad. She sent it in the mail to him with a lovely note and said, I think Sarah should probably have this. And that's my cousin Judy in 2016. And on the other side is her with my great-grandmother, Bertha Kilmer Hermans, in 1944. I picked up being family historian through my Aunt Sally Hermans Burdick, who passed away in 2003. She was also known as Sally Pulver, if anybody's local might have known her. And yeah, so when I had the bug and this quilt, I knew what I had to do. So I took a look at it and I said, what is this thing? Is it a tablecloth? What is this? It's just muslin panels. There are 42 total blocks. You're looking at 9 of them right here. It has family names on it. Some of them are my family. Most of them are local names. Bathricks and Cowses and Kilmers abound. And one of the blocks has 1903 written on it. So I knew that we were dealing with something that was at least 100 years old. There are 260 names total on the quilt, all of which have some form of biography in the book. So if you see some names coming up in these blocks and you don't hear me talking about them, buy the book and read all about them. When I got this, I was already doing genealogy research and working on DAR applications back when I was with them. So I had the skill set and the curiosity to see what this item was, why it was made, and who were all these people who were on it. And I just had a blast for the last decade learning who everybody was. I can't wait to share it with you. So what defines a signature quilt? I'm using the word signature as a kind of a blanket, pun intended, term. It is also sometimes called an autograph quilt, but they're not necessarily the signatures of a person. It just means a name. Some of them are in fact signatures, but for the purposes of most of these, it's just somebody's name that has been written on the quilt. Loosely defined, we're talking about a textile made of blocks of fabric stitched together, each or some of which have names on them. It's not always a quilt. It's not always signed. The terms are interchangeable. Sometimes you'll even hear a signature quilt referred to as an album quilt or a friendship quilt. However, those two terms aren't necessarily signature quilts. They could be regular quilts without any names, for the purpose on it. Those names that are on the quilt could be signed, actually by hand and ink and stuff. They could be written, just block written. They could be stamped with an indelible stamper. They could be stenciled. They could be embroidered, and they could be added to quilts for any number of reasons. They could be for friendship purposes, like someone's moving away and you want to remember all your friends when you go to California and never ever come back in the 1840s. It could also be to commemorate people who've passed away. So you keep it in the family. And we'll see an example of that in a little bit. And it could also be to raise funds. A lot of these things were generated, like mine was, to raise money and not for any kind of, heirloom purposes. They may or may not include embroidery, patchwork. Mine doesn't have patchwork. Ink, sometimes included, sometimes not. And they may also not be quilted at all. So quilters out there are going, yours isn't a quilt. There's no quilting there. They still called it a quilt. I know, obnoxious, but these wings were generated for fundraising purposes. They weren't batted, backed, bound, quilted, tied, none of it. but some signature quilts certainly were, and we're going to see an example of that in a second. So this is the 1950s Ancram quilt, also known as the Mary Moon Rockefeller quilt. It's on display at the Ancram Town Hall. So if you want to take a look at a cool local signature quilt, check this one out. You can see the reflection of the glass from the photograph I took. This was 1856. It was a family quilt. All the names are locals or families, members of hers. She was 19 when she made it, and it is a traditional style mid-19th century quilt with the chimney sweep design. It kind of looks like the broom that a chimney sweep would use. The names are put in that nice big wide white panel in the middle. We have the name Lavinia Silverdale on this one, and I think it says Frances Hoiseret on the other one. And again, they're all local names. And if you want to go see it, go check it out. But this is more an example of an actual quilt. It is quilted, it is backed, it is bound, it is pieced, and it is really nice and was taken good care of and handed down and preserved. But here's the 1903 Jackson Corner signature quilt. Big difference. It's stained, it's not quilted, it's not bound, it's homely as heck, but I absolutely adore it, and I hope you will come to adore it too when you read about it. So this is the 1903 block. You can see the date on the top of that block right there. And we have names like Harold Coons, Lulu Bathrick, Willie Baker, Harm Bathrick, Willis Bathrick, Ward Bathrick, and Mrs. Ward Bathrick. Note that also the colors look a little weird. The handwriting is all the same because probably somebody just wrote their names down. They aren't signed. The colors are strange, I think, because it got bleached. I think that my family used this as an actual tablecloth because it's covered in stains and the colors are weird. And you'll see some more examples of how weird the colors are in the next example. So you see the calla lily design in the middle probably had green foliage and not white foliage. It would be kind of insane to use that as a color choice when doing work. But again, probably bleached, and that particular floss did not hold the color when it got bleached. Lots and lots of names on here: Bathricks, Burns, Wilbur, Kilmer. Look at you, Maureen. There's your papes. Howard Bathrick, Herbert Bathrick, William Allendorf. Again, want to know more about them? It's in the book. The color here on the handwriting is actually called turkey red. The contrast is pop on here so you can see it better, but it is red in color. And it's very popular and common, and we'll talk about that in a second too. You'll also note that the calla lily is kind of not the greatest quality tracing going on in one of them, but it's homely, it's regional. These aren't people who are experts at what they do. They're just trying to raise some money for a cause. And the last example I'll show you close up of this particular quilt is what I call block 14. There are 40 individual listings on here, 10 of which are Mr. and Mrs. So there's technically 50 people that donated money for this particular one. The name in the middle is Mrs. W.G. Wright. She was formerly Jenny Edelman. Most of the names here are from Rock City. It has, I think, 170 something footnotes in this chapter because of all the people that I had to work on. But she must have won the prize for the most amount of people that she got to sign up. And again, you'll notice that the green of the lotus is white here and probably suffered from bleaching. And there's stains. Here's a really nice example, which is not my quilt. This is the circa 1900 Ancram quilt. It's in the exact same style. It has the feather stitching around the borders to connect the seams of all the blocks. It is just muslin. It is not quilted. It has the name spiraling around a central image. However, this is a very, very nice example of the form. You have a really nicely traced little boy. You have fine handwriting. It's all in turkey red. It looks spectacular. It is not on display, but it is in the holdings at the town of Ancram. So maybe if you ask nice, they might show it to you. Tell them I sent you. No, don't do that. But yeah, the red and white colors, not only pretty and popular, but they're also the colors of the Red Cross, which did a lot of these kind of quilts, and also the colors of the Methodist Church. So I didn't know the provenance until I did a search on Old Fulton history postcard website, the newspaper website. Those of you who do research know what I'm talking about. I was looking for my second great grandfather, Jacob Hermans, and then I found this guy, and I literally broke down in tears. This article explains everything there was to know about my quilt. If I didn't have this, there wouldn't be a book. So it says the proceeds of the festival of last week amounted to $42 net. The quilt made by the Ladies' Aid Society was sold at auction the last night, and it went to Jacob Hermans at $4. The ladies had secured $39.75 on the blocks, which made a total of $43.75. So the festival and the quilt cleared $85.75, which goes toward the minister's salary. So the names were probably collected for somewhere between 10 and 15 cents. Some of the blocks were done in ink and have been bleached or faded and no longer exist. So I don't know the total number of names. 260 is what remain. So given the price, maybe somewhere in there. My second great grandfather, Jacob Hermans, won it. That's how it came down through the family. I get it now. There's my answer. Amazing. It was meant to raise funds specifically for this minister's salary of the Jackson Corners Methodist Church. It doesn't expressly say that it's that church, but through deduction and other research, I discovered that it is him, and his name was R.L. Cadman. He also served Elizaville. Methodist preachers are itinerant, so they only hang out for a couple of years and then they shuffle them around. And he worked here for a couple of years and then moved on. He also worked in Poughkeepsie for a while and other places. And his brother, I think Samuel Parks Cadman, I might be wrong on the first name, is the guy they named Cadman Plaza for in Brooklyn. So when you hear the name Cadman in Brooklyn, same family as this guy. I think they were English. They actually came from England directly. So Methodist Ladies' Aid Societies had a manual. Oh my gosh, another thing I found online and almost cried when I found it. The Ladies' Aid Manual, a practical work for Ladies' Aid Societies from 1911, defines this thing, this art form, this piece, this fundraising thing. And here it is in glorious details. Autograph quilt. They use the word autograph, not signature. Old way of raising money, pieces of muslin, stamped in the center, outlined, corners marked with the autographs. And then that's also outlined in turkey red cotton. It's exactly the same as the Ancram example we've seen and our example, except we have the funky colors and the dubious handwriting. A charge of 15 to 25 cents may be asked for each of them. So that's how you get your donation. You were told to go out and go to your friends, go to the Grange Hall, go to your when your cousins come calling on Sunday and say, hey, would you like to have your name on this piece of muslin? Great, give me 25 cents. Or 10 or 15, depending. Kind of like Girl Scout cookies, only not as involved or fattening. This describes it as having strips of turkey red muslin involved in the process. So it's a little bit fancier, but it does say an old way. So maybe by 1900 or so, they were like, no, we don't have to do that. That's too hard. Let's do it the easy way. The quilt may be then sold to the highest bidder or given to the pastor's family. And I did see some examples in the local newspapers of the quilts being donated to the minister's family because they were itinerant and they would be leaving. So it was like a nice keepsake for them to have when they left. And there were more than one autograph / signature quilt done in the era at the time throughout our area. So when we're talking about the Jackson Corners Methodist Church, this is the structure we're talking about and the locality we're talking about. For anybody who's not from the area who's dialing into this talk, Jackson Corners is technically in Dutchess County, but anybody who lives there will tell you it's Gallatin and Milan. So you have both counties. You'll see Church Road that kind of wiggles up past that star in the middle on the map. That's fully in Gallatin. You have a lot of people who go back and forth between Jackson Corners and Elizaville, fully in Columbia County. So you have a place that straddles the Rojan, it straddles the county lines, and the people on the quilt from all of the localities you see on this map and beyond. You have a lot of Red Hook people, Rhinebeck people, Pleasant Valley, Poughkeepsie, not a lot further east because of the mountain and terrain and stuff like that. You don't have a lot of Millerton and almost no Connecticut whatsoever. The drawing here is by Ozzie Stippa. It is what the church would have looked like back in the 1880s when it was constructed in 1889. It was sold into private hands in 1940 after the hamlet waned and the congregation waned over about 20 years or so. But it still exists. It is still an excellent structure on Church Road on the right-hand side as you're going up. It doesn't have the steeple on top and it is behind a bunch of pine trees, but it is there. And it's across from the Grange Hall, I believe. Somebody is going to be screaming at me, telling me, no, you're wrong. Methodism came to our precise area, this precise area in the 1830s. The first meeting was held at William J. Coon's Public House, which was east of Elizaville. The first Jackson Corners meeting was held in 1846 at Alonzo Scriver's barn. And they were fervent enough by 1854, they constructed their first church. That one is no longer extant. This one, again, built in 1889. And now let's talk about the gals of the Ladies' Aid Society. In 1903, they were kind enough to print the list of officers in the newspaper. And so we have a list. And I also have a photograph courtesy of Mr. Wells of Minnie Neer and her family. Minnie Neer is not in the book. I think maybe she might have been one of those blocks that was inked and washed, because I can't imagine someone who was this involved in the community and the Grange and everything else just didn't participate or didn't collect from her family. So the officers were Maggie Kilmer, Anna Mae Edelman Smith, Harriet Berger Edelman, Mary Neer Bathrick, Minnie Guernsey Neer, Mina Kilmer, Mary Pitcher, and Susie Smith Walcott. I'm related to the Smiths and distantly to the Kilmers. Mina and Maggie were sisters, and Maggie Kilmer was 22 that year and was married in November to Willis Bathrick. Just a note. And so now we'll talk a little bit about some of the individual ladies of the quilt itself. And I think I removed one of these since I created, because I was editing this last night going, I don't like it, I gotta start over. So we're not gonna talk about Charity Jackson. She's technically not on the quilt. I think that was another reason why. Also, her story's kind of a bummer. It is block 15. It's about Lemuel Jackson, who is the gentleman who's listed. Yeah, I figured we'll keep it a little bit later, so you can read that in the book. So first we have Aina Ostromdding. I'm going to let you read this just for a second before I start talking. John Cotting of Rock City was tried for bigamy at the county court in Poughkeepsie on Friday last. He could not be convicted according to the laws of the state. This is extremely interesting because Aina Cotting, Mrs. J. Cotting, as she appears on block 14, is on the same block with another girl named Rose Shantz. Now, Aina was 38 at the time. She was married to John, had been married for a while, and Rose Shantz was a younger gal. They're both from the same neighborhood. In 1905, John Cotting went to the Dakotas with Rose Shantz and divorced Aina. And then in 1906, married Rose and came back. And in 1908, he was tried for bigamy. But he had actually done everything he was supposed to do. He just went to Dakotas, and I think people were really unhappy about it, which is understandable. But the reason I wanted to show this to you, not because, oh, bigamy, oh my goodness, but because the divorce laws were so strange back then that you actually had to go all the way to a territory. It wasn't even a state then, and form residency so that you could perform the divorce and get remarried and do what you had to do to change your life. It's insane. I didn't do a whole lot of research on that aspect of it because there was a lot to do. But if you go to a website called historyofyesterday.com and look for an article called When South Dakota Was America's Divorce Capital, check it out because it's fascinating. The whole era of insanity revolved around that. It's really, really cool. Aina remarried a gentleman named William Ober, and he had children from another marriage. They had their own family. And John and Rose had at least one daughter together. And they're buried in the Rock City Memorial Cemetery. And both couples continued to live in Rhinebeck ever afterwards. Next is Mary Dykeman Coons. Oh, sorry, Mary Coons Dykeman. My brain went circular instead of this way. You see her house here in this photograph, and below it is a clipping from a brochure from the railroads put out a brochure to advertise people to come to the area to stay for the summer, for summer boarding. You would get this booklet and leaf through it and say, let's see, at this station stop, there's these 6 farmhouses, and at this station stop, there's these 5, and these are the amenities they have. So this is the entry for Mrs. Daniel Dykeman, otherwise known as MC Dykeman. It accommodates 12, adults $4, kids $2.50, free from mosquitoes and malaria. That was a selling point. 5 minutes from the post office, a few steps from church. Some of the other places you could stay were really close to Huns Lake and had cool, hay rides and stuff. She didn't have the greatest amenities, but it was in the country, and it was, look at this house, it's fantastic. So you could come up on the Rhinecliff branch of the train. You come up from the Poughkeepsie and then over. to Jackson Corners, and you could stay at her house. This image comes from a postcard that she used as a business card that I got on eBay, and the backside of it, which says, you know, postcard like you would see, says, "My home, Mrs. M.C. Dykeman, Jackson Corners." So she must have handed it out to people either who stayed there or maybe people that she met to entice them to come. And lots of people in the area, not only just homeowners, but mostly farm owners, would host visitors from the city, and like a hotel, for weeks, sometimes months of the summer. Some people would return year after year, and then a lot of those people would stay and purchase property and become part of the community later on. More in the book about that. Susie Fulton, you've heard a lot about her on all of our newsletters and social medias and whatnot. She's the gal we've been telling you about lately. She's on the left. She's the adult lady, not the little girl. Burton Coon called her a person of refinement and culture. She was the daughter of Alicia and Margaret Smith Fulton, and her brother John P. Fulton is in the top right of the photograph. She and her sister Jenny Z. Fulton were teachers, and they were both maidens. They never married, and they taught in Jackson Corners, Cokertown, Elizaville, Rock City, Mount Ross. Susie taught at a kindergarten in Red Hook at one point, and she also taught at District Number 7 in Rock City before 1872. She was just a very smart lady, a very respectable lady. She also taught at the Poughkeepsie Orphan House, which was what it was called at the time. It still exists under a different name. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. It is in the book, though. And there's a typhoid outbreak. So in May of 1903, she was sent home, and was probably home at the time that her name and 10 cents or whatever was collected for this. She recovered by July, however, and was then working at the Newburgh Orphan House, where when they put it in the paper and said that she was doing this, the people who had hired her referred to her as a superior person of the responsible charge. So she was very respected. She also played organ in Cokertown, and she was a member of the Chautauqua Institution. Luella Hateman Stall. Her husband, Sylvester, went by Vesey, which I found out in the newspapers. I love it when I can discover people's nicknames. It's the best, or the pronunciation of their names. There was an article once, and I wish I kept it, but I saw it with my eyeballs, that had phonetically spelled someone's name, and I couldn't figure out who they were talking about until I figured out that they were spelling Urijah, which is, when you look at the name Urijah, you would think it was Urijah, but they pronounced his name Urijah. And I knew that because somebody phonetically spelled it in the newspaper, because I didn't know how to spell it correctly. I was like, I did a little dance when I found that. So Luella and Vesey were the owners of the hotel at Elizaville, and they also took in summer boarders, as part of their business, but specifically they would have them for long periods of time in the summer. And their establishment was also a dance hall and a place to hold parties. It must have been the best place. At one point, they had a dance hall in an upper floor of the structure. I'm not sure if it was the hotel structure or a different structure, that had to be closed off because they deemed it unsafe. They were afraid that it had worn itself out, and if they held another dance in there, they would dance the place apart. So very cute. I mean, these are dances with no alcohol. It's got like a fiddler and some people and some tea, and they're having a great time. But they were going to dance the place apart. The two of them had 3 children, daughters, named Minnie, Flossie, and Kitty, which are the best names for daughters I've ever heard. Luella was the daughter of Andrew Hateman and Catherine Allendorf. And lastly, we have Anna Mae Edelman Smith. She's not on the block. This is her daughter, Ruth, but she was one of the Ladies' Aid Society, the first vice president. Her parents, her sister-in-law, and her daughter appear on the quilt. Her son, Sterling Smith, died at 6 years of age, probably of pneumonia, in 1898. And in true Victorian fashion, we have a cabinet card, memorial card here for him, because he was so young and it was so tragic for him to have passed. And he was the only son, and they had enough money to make one of these, to have one of these produced and hand out to their friends and relatives. And that's how I acquired it, because these are my relatives. And Ruth Smith later married Joseph Bruette, and she is the cutest patootie you've ever seen. And it makes sense that her name appears in the quilt 3 times. I think that people just, anytime she said, "Can you please donate money?" And they said, "Oh, we'll put your name on it, honey. Oh my gosh, you're so cute." That's my thought. I'm projecting onto them, but I think that's what it was. But yeah, these are cabinet cards, circa 1890s. Ruth appears on blocks 1, 25, and 30. And I talked really, really, really fast. So I'm done. You can read about all 260 names on the quilt, not just from Jackson Corners, and including a bunch from Red Hook, Tivoli, Cokertown, Annandale, and the surrounding areas of Red Hook in this book. You can find it on my blog at Oblong Books, the best bookstore in the world. And also I have a local history book, a blog called Holder Newt, and it's at holdernewt.com. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. I know I'm super excited to read, the specifics about those stories. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat that we received. Let me go through those. So we have one who's asking, can you please say again where the Ancram quilt is on display?
Sure. It's at the Ancram Town Hall. Easy to find. Just walk in and ask them to see it. It's like hanging up on a wall behind some glass. Okay, great.
And another Ruth Hurd asks, where was the Methodist Episcopal Church located?
Sure. If you go to Jackson Corners and you go to up Church Road, that road that snakes up to the north, Larry can tell me which one it is, and Maureen could too. It's either the first or second house on the right-hand side, which would be the eastern side of the road. It's behind a lot of trees at the moment, but if you look at the one old photograph, imagine everything with like no trees because everybody cut them down for firewood. It's very hard to see it now, but back in the day it would have been very, very obviously prominent right in the heart of town.
It's the first house on the right-hand side.
It is the first house.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Great. I have a question. I was just, given that it's Women's History Month, I was just wondering, what are the types of challenges you faced when doing this type of research, especially for people who may not be very famous? How do you do this type of nitty-gritty research on just everyday people?
Yeah, it's without the newspaper, impossible. I mean, impossible. There were so few people like Maureen, for example, who said, "Here's my family history and I'll talk to you about it." If I only had those, I'd have 5 stories. I'd have my own family stories and I have maybe a handful of other people that I could find. But being able to see who made social calls and who was sick and then other crazy things like whose kids were sent away to the orphan asylum. That's the bummer. There's an enormous amount of things that were easy to do because of the newspaper. The hard part was finding things about women. In Women's History Month, back in 1903, it may not surprise anybody to learn that Mrs. John Smith, there is a Mrs. John Smith on the block, but I'm just using it as an example, is impossible to find out who the heck she was a lot of the time. So if she didn't do something in her community or her family wasn't around her to identify her, it was much more difficult. One of the other things I found tough with names and such like that was the summer boarders. When I figured out that they were summer boarders, I was like, oh, thank goodness, these aren't just random people who appeared out of nowhere. I could place them with Bessie and Luella Stahl. I could place them with Mrs. MC Dykeman and say, it's summer, it's August. These are these weird names that I can't find anywhere else. The Zimmers and whatnot, and the McFadden or something like that. These are people from New York City. That's why I can't find them up
here. Can you tell us a couple of the newspapers that you used a lot?
Mm-hmm. Red Hook Journal, Pine Plains Register, which was called just Register back then, and the Columbia Republican were the big 3 ones. Additionally, there were some smaller ones depending on if families moved in other places, and I had to research them further down the line. But I actually read the entire 1903 Pine Plains Register in my living room on microfilm during the pandemic.
That's impressive.
I have a microfilm reader in my house.
Nice.
That is the level of nerd I am.
So how plugged in were these people to the wider world since, you've read the whole newspaper?
They were. I mean, certainly page 2 or something like that had a little 1 column of what was going on in the universe. But 1903 was kind of quiet. There wasn't, we weren't in World War I yet. We didn't have the big media culture with the radio service giving you the news all the time. And these were local farming folks who were more concerned about agriculture. Page, I want to say 3 or 4 was like 100% agriculture and what the Granges were doing. There was more reporting about what the Grange was up to in like Amelia than there was about what was going on in New York City. But I'm just talking about the Pine Plains Register newspaper. They certainly read other papers. They certainly read New York City papers. My perspective is only coming from that one paper.
Sarah, I wrote you a message, but it's not come through. My name is Debbie Laux, and I am the great granddaughter of Edna Bathrick Coons.
Hello.
And you have the wrong picture on page 150.
Okay.
That is my mother, not my grandmother.
Okay, can you email me that information?
Yes, can you give me an email?
It's my full name at Gmail. So Sarah K. Hermans at gmail.com.
Spell your last name for me.
It's on the screen you're looking at right now.
Oh, I don't see it.
Is it not shared anymore? Or maybe it's not shared anymore.
Sarah Herman?
I can connect you two since I have everybody's contact information.
That'd be great.
I down emails to make sure that
And
conversation.
also, I wanted to let you know, I have all of my grandmother's historic records.
Ooh.
Our family is tied to the Lynx, the Knickerbockers, all the way up in Copaig. One of our relatives is buried up there, Florinda Knickerbocker.
I look forward to talking to you more about this by email. That's great.
Okay, yeah, and we go back. The name was not originally Bathrick; it was Patrick.
Yep, I'm aware. Yeah, we'll talk by email. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Glad we're making some connections. So I have some other questions in the chat here.
Debbie, can you mute yourself again? There's a reverb, hon.
I've got it. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Nope, never mind. Cool, thank you.
Okay, so do you have a favorite square or a couple of favorite squares?
Well, I like the ones that are disasters almost as much as I like the ones that are really nice looking, because there's a couple that are nice looking. Trying to see in what's behind me at the moment. But you can see every block has a photograph in the book. It is in black and white because color is expensive. But some of them have very nice work. There's one with some holly that's filled in. It's like a satin stitch holly. And then there's one that's, I think it's a flower. I'm not sure. It's white, it's outline stitch, and it's lumpy, and it probably was done by a child, and it's adorable.
That's great. Let me see, going through a couple of these questions. I've got some specific family questions, not sure if you'd be able to answer them, but I was asking about an Adam Edelman, who was a blacksmith in Germantown.
Sure.
The Grange Hall was called Edelman's Hall before the Grange was built. Do you know if Mrs. Smith that you mentioned earlier is related to him?
I don't know if I know that for sure. That is a tough family because it's like clearly if a bunch of people named Edelman show up at the same time from Germany, you would think they're all going to be related. I can, if you want to email me again, full name at Gmail, no periods, no spaces, with the K in the middle. I would be happy to chat with you about that.
Okay. I'm writing down the question.
Sarah, this is Alice Colburn Bathrick.
Hello.
Bathrick Colburn. And I want you to know that when I read your book, I felt like you had written that book for me. Because you have both sets of my grandparents in that book before they were married. And it was wonderful to read it and read about them.
Oh, thank you very much.
And the Kilmers, the Bathricks, the Hosapples, they were all my grandparents.
Yeah, I'm a Kilmer twice over.
Right. And you have a whole family tree in there that was just unbelievable.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
The one Bathrick panel with all the, if you've seen it with like the hash marks where they were like, we're not embroidering the name Bathrick 12 times, forget it. So they just did hash marks instead, like quote marks. That was my favorite experience with the Bathrick family because there was a baby in there named Kohler Bathrick, and he deceased shortly after the quilt was made. And I think that my quilt is one of the few times that his life was imprinted in the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, so when I saw that, I went, I have snatched that. I've caught that in my hand, and it just felt so good to do that. One of my favorite things is remembering people that other people have forgotten. And so when I saw him, I went, ooh, it really moved me, and I was glad to be able to do that.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
You did a wonderful job of researching.
Thank you. Oh, Elizabeth, you're muted.
I'll do a couple more questions. Mary McFerrin asks if you have a sense of what the national background of a lot of these people were, if Dutch or German.
Yeah, it depends. A lot of them are Palatine German because our area. You got Kilmers, you got all these folks who came from that descendancy. But you also have a lot of German immigrants. You have the Edelmans, you have the Waggards and whatnot, who are recent non-Palatine German immigrants who, if you walked into the Jackson Carter's General Store, you'd hear thick German accents in 1903, which is a really cool thing to think about. You also have the Cotters, who are Irish heritage. But yeah, we're talking Europeans, lots of Europeans. And some Dutch. There's some Dutch trickling in there. The Hermans family is Dutch for sure. But yeah.
Great. And we have another one. Were the Kilmers on the quilt related to Irene Kilmer?
I don't know if I know off the top of my head which Irene Kilmer is. If you want to email me, I can look it up. A lot of the Kilmers are all related, but there is a thing where some of them are not. And there's a double L, single L thing. I know, I'm aware. I'm both. I have both. But yeah, if you want to email me, I could provide some information.
Okay. And Thea asks, how does it feel to have written such a personal history of the area where you grew up and where you have such deep family roots? Were there any surprises for you?
Yes, I feel incredible about it. I feel like I've done something to honor the people who went before me, the people who hung on to this quilt for a long time, despite being probably impoverished enough that they had to use it as a tablecloth. My Hermans family, had some hard times, especially in the 20s and 30s. Farming here, as everybody knows, is ridiculous and difficult. And they actually went to Long Island for a long time. And one of the most surprising things that happened in this whole process was connecting with local people who are here now or were here, like Maureen and Larry and Ronnie Bathrick and such. And then they putting me in touch with other people. And I got to meet Arna Jordan. And she passed recently at 103.
Yes.
In January. She was an incredible lady. She lived alone in her house in Elizaville for ever and ever, and had an enormous family. And she knew my great-grandparents. She went to high school with my grandfather in Long Island. And that's why her family came up here, is because they met my great-grandfather. And he said, hey, where I live is kind of cool. You want to check it out? And they said, yeah, sure, we'll look. And they fell in love with the area and came up. And hearing somebody, who actually knew them and speak about them and stuff was a treasure I will have forever and ever and ever. And it's probably the most remarkable thing about the whole experience.
That's great. Thank you. I just think it's so impressive to try to weave all of these stories together. You have all of these moving parts, and I'm just very impressed about how you're able to connect these family trees and find these stories. So thank you again for agreeing to do this presentation with us tonight.